Good evening. My name is Jenna Ben-Yehuda. I'm the president and CEO of the Truman Center for National Policy. We are really thrilled to welcome you here tonight to the launch of a new Truman Center Task Force report, Transforming State: Pathways to a More Just, Equitable, and Innovative Institution. Truman is an impact community for national security leaders, and together we unite, build, and lead to advance whole of society American leadership for human rights, inclusion, prosperity, and security at home and abroad. Folks, tonight is a celebration of the importance of diplomacy and of the hard-fought work of our report authors and esteemed co-chairs. But it's also a night for reflection and for humility. The State Department, our nation's leading foreign affairs agency, is in need of repair. And some of that repair work is the result of deferred maintenance over many years, while other concerns are more recent. And at Truman, we saw this enormous opportunity to offer bold but really achievable recommendations for a transformation that begins with rebuilding trust amongst a workforce that has long missed out on so much opportunity and has had a tough number of years. But to do that, we seek to advance transparency and accountability, to build a more resilient organization, and to do it all through a lens of diversity. We know that foreign policy starts at home, but we offer concrete solutions to help make that actionable. And all of this thinking has been brought together by an incredible group of Truman members and drafters and reviewers from around the country. These are mid-level, current and former State Department officials who we know are really central to making any transformation a success. Tonight, you'll hear from our co-chairs and from our pillar leads and from our terrific task force lead, Miriam Safety, our senior visiting fellow at Truman Center. The report is live. We're live and recorded and online, and you'll be able to see a recording of this on our webpage at trumancenter.org. We're sharing all of the bios of our speakers here tonight in the chat, so I won't waste any more time in introducing them. I'll only ask you to tweet using the hashtag #TransformingState and join me in welcoming our first speaker this evening, our co-chair, Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley. Madam Ambassador, it's really thrilling to have you. Welcome this evening to Truman.
Thank you so much, Jenna. And I have to start off with thanking my co-chairs for their incredible commitment to this issue and the incredible people, the men and women who worked on this report. Their contributions have been invaluable. We know, but more broadly, everyone is coming to understand that this issue of diversity and inclusion isn't important because it's nice to do, because it's a moral thing to do. This is about doing the work of diplomacy, the work of the Department of State, the work of representing the United States better. That means bringing all the perspectives, the backgrounds, of broadening that aperture of what is excellence and truly including everyone, all of us. The recommendations that are in this report, I have read it. They are brilliant, all of them. I think it is going to be an incredible tool for the Department of State. It will be an amazing addition to the toolkit that the department has, and that we are in a particular time where we have had leadership from the president, from the Secretary of State being very clear that they are down with this project, that they intend to make a difference, and that they welcome the tools, the support, and the partnership of all of us who are working on this to do better in the Department of State. The last thing I really want to say is, again, how privileged I feel to associate with this body of work. The men and women who worked on this, and I will tell you, there were some lively discussions as we went through these recommendations, but they are fully informed, factual, well-supported, and worthy of consideration and use if that's going to work. And I will close out with that. I look forward to hearing the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, we'd like to hear from Congressman Joaquin Castro, our second of the three co-chairs. Mr. Congressman, over to you.
Well, thank you, Jenna. And it's great to be back with the Truman Center to unveil the work and recommendations of the Transforming State Task Force. And I want to thank you again for convening this effort and for leading the Truman Center. And also want to thank my co-chairs, Ambassador Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley and Senator Chris Murphy. It's an honor to be here with two transformative thinkers on foreign policy and on the State Department. I also want to commend Miriam for her leadership of the task force, and Wes, Victor, Kimberly, and the whole task force, people who are currently at the State Department and are invested in strengthening it by volunteering here for working hard on each of the pillars of this report. And this report couldn't come at a more crucial time. From competition with China and the threat of climate change to record numbers of displaced people and the backsliding of democracies, the challenges our nation faces would be daunting under any circumstances. But these are not normal circumstances, as we all know. Our nation's infrastructure diplomacy, first and foremost, the State Department, has suffered 4 years of intentional neglect, I believe, and disengagement. And it must be rebuilt and renewed. And as you all know, that opportunity comes only every once in a while where you can make transformational change to a department of the federal government. I would say, in short, when we look at what has gone on over the last few years, we're in the midst of a generational crisis in American diplomacy. Last summer, as chair of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations, I led hearings to learn more about the State Department's challenges with retaining and promoting a diverse diplomatic corps. We listened to the testimony of experts like my co-chair, Ambassador Abercrombie-Winstanley, to inform the Congress how these issues could be addressed. This led to legislation that I introduced last year, including the Diversity and Inclusion at the Department of State Act and the Department of State Student Internship Program Act. The good news is that there's no shortage of solutions and people trying in this Congress to achieve those solutions. The best minds in US foreign policy have clearly thought long and hard about how to rebuild the United States State Department, how to improve America's standing, and how the United States might constructively weigh in on just about every topic of global and regional concern. Those voices, experts, and debates are reflected in this report, as you'll see. The other good news is that we have no shortages of Americans ready to meet this moment. Young people today might just be the most globally minded, civically engaged, and diverse generation our nation has ever seen. And I think we can all be proud of that. And I'm confident that the American diplomats of today and tomorrow are more than committed to meet any challenge our nation faces. And they'll do so with commitment, with integrity, professionalism, competence, and in the best interest of our nation. And so most of all, I want to say thank you all for including me as part of this effort to think about these challenges. I spoke often over the last year about rebuilding our infrastructure diplomacy and putting diplomacy first. And I think this report reflects that spirit. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Senator Murphy.
Well, I'm all that stands between you and hearing more about this report. So let me not repeat everything that has been already said, except to reiterate our thanks to the team, to Miriam and the entire committee that spent such an intense amount of time over a very short window putting together a pretty exhaustive set of solutions. And thanks to both of my co-chairs, we're very glad to lend our names to a report that I think is going to be incredibly impactful. Both the ambassador and Joaquin are right. We're fortunate that we are, pushing at a door that is unlocked right now, but it is not a door that is open. And what I think is so important about this report, as you will see, is that it sort of paints a picture of the kind of robust infrastructure you need inside the State Department to support the values that I think we all agree on. So it's not enough to just have a chief diversity officer that tells you and signals to you that Secretary Blinken is serious. But what this report gives us is is all of the rest of the pieces, right? The mentorship programs, the accountability structure, the ability of employees to have input on a regular basis, officers to have input on a regular basis as to what's going right and what's going wrong, so that diversity and inclusion, all of the values that we're going to talk about today, have that support structure that undergirds it all. That's just so important. And then second, I just want to thank the committee and the task force for really thinking long and hard about how to connect diplomacy and the work of diplomacy to the American people. One of my pet projects over the past few years has been to sort of reinstall the idea of subnational diplomacy in the work that we do all around the world. The Chinese have been very good at this. We used to be better. But as you want to try to sell the importance of America playing a role for good in the world to the public, get mayors and governors, city councilmen involved in the work of marketing what's great about America, creating people-to-people connections. I just think this is a really important section of this report. And it was something that we talked about today in our hearing with the two deputy secretary nominees. Boy, it was dizzying to listen to both Brian and Wendy hopscotch from one crisis to another crisis around the world. It's to this point that Joaquin made about all of the work that we need to do. But we spent time today talking about the fact that it doesn't have to all fall on the State Department alone. The State Department can enlist the American people and leaders throughout the country in this effort. And this report, I think, is going to, be very, very helpful to those of us that want to enlist more great American leaders in the cause of diplomacy, in the work of rebuilding and repairing America's image around the world, which is, as it stands today, a pretty Herculean endeavor. So count me as a huge fan of the work. I'm super glad to have been associated with it and look forward to hearing more about it. By the way, you've got a ton of great press today. NPR did a great rollout this morning. People are talking about this report. And so great job, not just in putting it out there, but in making sure that people heard it today.
Thank you so much, Senator Murphy. And really just a special thank you to all of our co-chairs. The folks here tonight did not just add their names and the prestige of their office and titles to this report. They have been with us in the drafting and reviewing process throughout a pretty heady January of an insurrection and impeachment and inauguration, and stuck with us through thick and thin. And I think it's a testament to the support for this work in the House and Senate, and Ambassador Abercrombie-Winstanley, and your personal fortitude in listening to hours and hours of Truman debate behind the scenes, and certainly your many decades of experience representing our country around the world. Now is the moment you've all really been waiting for, I think, which is to hear from our esteemed team leader here, Miriam Saifi, who will talk about the structure of the report and turn it over to our pillar leads. Miriam.
Thank you so much, Jenna. I want to start by thanking you, the Truman Center, the phenomenal co-chairs, their teams, as well as in particular the 30 extraordinary co-authors who really poured heart and soul into this report. We all participated in our personal capacities, and our views do not necessarily represent our institutional affiliations. For me, this task force was more than just producing a report. It was personal. And for the team I had the honor of leading, it was personal for them too. It was personal for all of us. I grew up in Texas as one of the only brown kids in my class. And when I started my public service career as a Peace Corps volunteer at 19, I was one of the only brown kids in that group. And when I joined AmeriCorps, I was yet again one of the only people of color in my cohort. And so when I joined the Foreign Service just over a decade ago, it's been pretty much the same story. So we highlight data in the report that showcase these disparities. But for me, the most powerful, the most sort of transformational part of the task force were the personal testimonials. The State Department is an amazing institution that we all love, which is why we joined this task force. And this is a historic moment where there are calls at the highest levels to build a department that looks like America. Yet one of our challenges is that we have an informal culture, which the report sort of discusses and digs into, where we are hardwired to kind of keep our heads down. So when something happens, it's not really the norm to speak up. Mid-career civil and foreign service officers in the report push back a bit on this culture by sharing their stories. And that in and of itself is actually an act of extreme courage. And some of the topics we discussed in the report are tough, deep-rooted inequities that go back decades. Things like structural racism and gender discrimination that are not unique to the department. We face them in our own country and around the world, as well as adversities faced by people with disabilities, or even navigating the stigma of accessing mental health, which we know is critical in this moment as we mark the year of a pandemic. So these are issues we can no longer afford to ignore. A healthy and inclusive diplomatic corps is critical to our national security and essential if we are to meet the challenges of the 21st century. When my parents migrated from India to Texas, I don't think they imagined they would have a daughter who would grow up. I think they wanted me to be a doctor, but I don't think they would have imagined I would grow up to be a diplomat representing America to South Asia, which I ended up doing when I was spokesperson in Lahore. And I realized early on that my bridge building skills as a product of immigrants were actually an asset. And I even managed to link the cities of Austin and Lahore through a subnational program that benefited the economies of both Texas and Pakistan. So this report is unique in that it is grounded in the voices of mid-career officers. In all of the reform reports that have been written over many decades, people who look like me and my co-authors were often not at the drafting table. In the words of the late, great Shirley Chisholm, and there's a painting of her behind me that I painted, I love her, she said, "If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. This report is that folding chair." And with that, I want to pass the mic to my esteemed co-author, Dr. Wes Reiser.
Thank you so much, Miriam. And it is just such an incredible pleasure to be here tonight. I want to first thank the Truman Center and Jenna, a longtime friend of mine, for giving us the space to do this. And I couldn't be more grateful to the co-chairs and to everyone who volunteered to sign up for this thing, which started as an idea by just a couple of us last summer, that this was a moment where we could look to really make structural change in the State Department for the better. I led the first pillar of the report, which is entitled Laying a Strong Foundation for Transformation. To understand where we are now, I think one quick data point that helps you understand where the State Department is versus where it was just a few years ago. In 2016, state was ranked only behind NASA as the second best large federal agency to work for in the entire US government. And it has fallen close to the very bottom in a matter of 4 years. But it didn't fall to the bottom so quickly only because of things that happened in the last 4 years, but because there was actually a lot of creakiness within the system already. And all it took was a few years of rampant mismanagement to allow the department to fall so far, so fast. This was personal for a lot of people in the department, including myself. When I went into management a few years ago, one of the first things you get taught about is how to handle Equal Employment Opportunity Act cases. I was thrilled to learn about these tools in case I ever needed to help one of my own staff through it. I never thought that myself, as a middle-aged white guy, was going to have to file an EEO complaint. But I did have to file a sexual orientation claim myself during the last administration against a political appointee. And it was an incredibly challenging and painful experience. And it was an experience that the department, it proved to me that the department really didn't have the tools in place to be able to help people when they were illegally targeted by those above them in the chain of command. And it really, for me, opened my eyes to how much needed to be fixed and helped me empathize better with those who have been through far worse than I have been through during my time at the department. Our pillar had a lot to chew on because there's a lot of change that needs to be made, and I'm only going to hit on a couple quick highlights. First off, that there can be no restoration of trust among the staff of the State Department without both healing and accountability. We have to acknowledge the past to understand the present situation that the department finds itself in. And we also have to use data to understand where we are now so that we can properly chart a path forward. Pillar 1 discusses how we can strengthen accountability mechanisms through the department and provide resources for survivors so that they can be safe and free from retaliation. This includes professionalizing the EEO process which is currently a volunteer-driven process in the department. We also look at cultural changes that need to take place within the department. First and foremost is that the department needs to welcome and reward dissent. The dissent channel has existed since the Vietnam War, but the dissent channel actually had serious flaws in it. Two of the report authors, myself and another, had a dissent illegally rejected in 2017 because they had gotten too many of them at once. Nowhere in the dissent channel regulations was that allowed, but that started to happen and dissents were regularly blocked. But we also have to create a department where junior and mid-level officers can spur innovation within the ranks and feel the ability to be able to bring creative new ideas to the table. We need to break down institutional barriers, especially between the civil and foreign service, and break the glass ceiling for the civil service, as most senior positions in the State Department are reserved for the foreign service. As a civil servant in my mid-career, I don't see very much future growth for me if we don't find ways to open the door for other civil servants like myself to be able to move up. And we also look at how we can modernize and leverage the pandemic to create a more flexible workplace. And finally, we look at how we can make more equitable structures in the department. Part of that involves right-sizing the ratio of career staff to political appointees. The report makes a very strong argument that 75% of Senate-confirmed positions should go to career officials rather than to political appointees, many of whom are unqualified donors. Also ensuring that senior jobs are open to both services and that there's transparent in the processes by which the department works, going all the way down to the nitty-gritty of things like procurement. In my view, Pillar 1 lays the groundwork for renewal and for the sustainable transformation that the other pillars talk about. And with that, I'm pleased to hand the floor over to Vic Marsh, who can tell you more about the second pillar.
Good evening, everyone. So glad to be with you, and a huge thank you to our co-chairs and our fearless leader, Miriam Saifi. It's just been a pleasure. Back last year when Miriam invited me to this, she made me an offer I couldn't refuse. This work sort of activated two important identities for me professionally. First, I'm a proud alumnus of the State Department, served from 2007 to 2015. Second, I'm now a researcher on workforce diversity issues. I'm a PhD candidate in organizational behavior, expected to graduate this May. My dissertation first draft is due in 12 days, not that anyone's counting. So the Truman Task Force is a great merger of these two backgrounds. It's a chance to speak with the 700 or more of you who have RSVP'd for this important launch event today. And it's a chance to speak to people who are bosses in an organization that I care deeply about, the US Department of State. So my role in this effort has been to bring the research lens of what works and what efforts, however well-intentioned, just don't deliver the kinds of results we need for our organization. And I'd like to talk about this in two broad categories: the hardware, which Senator Murphy discussed as the structures, and the software. The hardware is the organizational boxes on the organizational chart and the rules and regs in your foreign affairs manual, the construction of your panels for promotion. The software are things like the behaviors. What are the bosses doing? What are our general managers doing to and for the workers of the organization, including our tens of thousands of foreign service nationals? So good news on the diversity front. Not many people hear good news a lot of times on diversity issues, but research has carefully traced for everything we've done from about 1970 to about 2019, even some of the newfangled approaches out there these days. And the two structures that we have the best news for are task forces as well as diversity managers. Now, what's the software that helps make these things work? Task forces work if their membership is executive level and if their activities are focused on the hard brass tacks numbers. You want to have executives in these sorts of things, not low-powered individuals who don't have power to change the specific hardware of the organization. You want to have the executives in there because they get to ask tough questions of anyone in the organization. They get to demand follow-up activities. They get to demand and receive data if they're actually focused on this stuff. So we've got good news about that structure if the behaviors are data-driven and if it's executives doing the work. With diversity managers, this is a piece of hardware that earns the most unearned amount of eye rolls throughout the US population. Oh, great, you hired a diversity manager. Great, that will do. Well, it turns out that sometimes structural changes like this are bad ideas. In the banking sector, we see private firms introducing chief risk officers. Bad news for research scholars, chief risk officers increase the amount of systemic risk. Don't do it. But when we look at diversity and lining up your diversity goal of having more diversity with the structural change of appointing a diversity manager, there we actually finally see some alignment. So we actually have good news for those of us who care about advancing diversity and inclusion. Having diversity managers with the right know-how and having task forces with the right executive membership work a lot. Now, what are these structures delivering? What's the real software? They're delivering iterative improvements to organization-wide mentorship programs. Formal mentorship matching is another one that people roll their eyes at. People prefer to have organic mentorship experiences. Boy, if everyone could graduate from the Woodrow Wilson School, I think we all would have organic networks that were very powerful and helpful in our careers. But that's not the reality. The school can only grow to be so big. And so formal mentorship matching fills the gap for everyone who isn't walking in the door with an organic network ready to serve them. So how good is it? Formal mentorship matching, even if you keep all the rest of your organizational changes the same, in well-controlled studies, we're talking about delivering 18% bumps up in your executive presence of Black women in 5 years. We're talking about increases of Hispanic men and Hispanic women from 9 to 23% respectively in leadership ranks. We're talking about Asian men and women experiencing boosts of 18 to 24% respectively. This is research supported in well-controlled studies. So the fundamental task we have ahead of us is to make sure we're matching our attention and matching our efforts and our funding to the evidence-supported approaches to advance diversity and inclusion. We simply don't have extra money lying around to double down on iterating on things that are permanently failing programs for achieving diversity. When we have great results available with strong evidence supporting them, I think we can do the taxpayer a big favor by betting on the programs that work solidly. So look forward to Q&A. It's been an active and wonderful process, a great experience under Mariam's leadership and under our co-chairs, and just look forward to making a contribution in my new career here.
Thank you, Vic. Kimberly, Pillar 3.
Good evening. My name is Kim Olson, and I entered the Foreign Service through the Pickering Fellowship Program in 2008. After 2 tours, a new baby, and a terrorist bombing, my husband and I wanted to take a break. I applied for leave without pay, and the department denied that request. My request to the Director General was also denied in an appeal. So in 2014, I chose to resign my commission and move back to Oregon with my husband and baby daughter. In Oregon, I transitioned from federal to state government and served as the policy director to the state treasurer. It was this transition out of the Beltway and back home that sparked my passion for the work we are undertaking in Pillar 3 of this report. In Oregon, it was clear rather quickly that the work of the State Department is essentially a black box for many Americans. This knowledge gap leaves the department without a real constituency outside of major metropolitan areas. In recent remarks, Secretary Blinken has called for a foreign policy that delivers for all Americans. And this report clearly states that the key to making that happen is hands-on, proactive, and nationwide in its approach. This pillar focused on creating innovative and actionable recommendations for how the department can better engage Americans during the Biden administration and in the years to come. Our largest recommendations were that the department establish 3 new offices. The first, an Office of State and Local Diplomacy, sometimes referred to as subnational diplomacy. This office would be charged with expanding diplomatic engagement across America. Officers assigned to this office would examine how US foreign policy affects both rural and urban populations across the country. The office would then be coupled with a significant expansion of the Pearson Fellowship Program, when it would place mid-level foreign and civil service officers not only in positions on the Hill, but in governors and mayors' offices nationwide. Second, an Office of Innovation Diplomacy, which would advise the Secretary of State on global technology policy, engage in outreach to the private sector, and connect decentralized innovation hubs across the country with interested parties overseas. This office would look beyond Silicon Valley to new technology hubs that have sprung up over the past decade and ensure the department regularly engages with experts and specialists in these areas. And finally, an Office of Entertainment Diplomacy to focus on building relationships with the entertainment industry and creating a better understanding of the work of the department. We also looked at existing offices and programs and made recommendations to make those more efficient and effective. We recommended expanding state's footprint on Capitol Hill and exploring more proactive engagement with Congress. We are seeking drastic expansions of the Diplomat in Residence program and the hometown diplomat programs, ensuring that students and young people in every US state and territory have access to information about the Foreign Service and work of the department. And we asked Congress to create a diplomatic reserve corps of former foreign and civil service officers trained to respond to surges in department needs, whether due to international crisis or necessity. Creating new programs and offices will require increased appropriations from Congress. A department that creates local connections to the foreign and civil service officers who drive US foreign policy forward will in turn inform foreign policy conversations at kitchen tables across the United States. We can no longer afford to skimp on connecting with our own populace. If we want to transform the Department of State into a 21st century powerhouse, we must have the resources to do it right. Thank you.
Kim, thank you so much. And thanks to all the pillar leads. And again, the members within each of the pillar leads. We did this in a 6-week period and we covered a magnificent scope. So we have about 20 minutes or so for Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and get this started with the co-chairs. Ambassador Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley, my question is for you. Secretary Blinken recently announced a Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer position. What will set this position up for success?
Thank you. A couple of things. One, being properly resourced so that the challenges before such an office can be met and answered. And for the department, it's going to be that it is a point person. When you want something done, you need to know who's responsible and who's accountable. And certainly that accountability has been diffused in the past. And so bringing it to one point in the secretary's office, speaking for the secretary, I think is going to be huge in setting the person up for success. So making sure that everyone understands that it is a priority throughout the building, not just the leadership, not just recruitment, but that important middle section, that culture of the building, and having the resources, the data, having access to the data, being able to get it, to demand it, to review it, to understand it, and to act on it. That's it.
Thank you so much. And a lot of our report touches on that, the data-driven, as Vic calls it, like we need to liberate the data and in order to really understand, what the issues are and this focus on accountability and retention. Representative Castro, the report highlights a range of legislative interventions that you've championed to concretely build a more just and equitable State Department. This includes, and there's many, the SHAPE Act, the Love Act, paid internships, and more. What do you see as a top line legislative priority in promoting this equity lens and justice in the department?
No, all of them, but there's a lot of work to do, as you all know, and there's so many great parts of the report. Let me just take one piece because we've talked about issues at mid-career, we've talked about promotion issues, retention issues, diversifying the State Department. But one thing that is moving now is the effort that I've made and others have made. Senator Booker is on top of it in the Senate, I know, is paid internships at the Department of State, which is the entry level, the pipeline. There's so many folks who never get their foot in the door at all, even to see if they like it or it's something they want to pursue, including a lot of people of color and a lot of low and moderate income Americans whose families can't float them while they do an unpaid internship in Washington. And so I have a paid internship bill. We've been working with the State Department with so many different stakeholders. And that was also, we were able to get that language into the State Department reauthorization bill, which is moving, of course. And I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to get that done, whether it's a standalone bill or it becomes part of the state authorization bill.
Thank you so much. And the way we designed the report, we have recommendations bucketed by legislative and policymaker. And I think it really is sort of a holistic approach. And you've identified a key barrier, which is for everyone. It's but in particular groups that have been historically excluded. Senator Murphy, the report advocates for the creation of an Office of State and Local or Subnational Diplomacy, and you have introduced co-sponsored bipartisan legislation to establish such an office. Why is this important?
Well, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, if we want to compete with our adversaries like China for influence around the world when we're trying to make the case that it should be US and European food safety standards or product safety standards or technological standards that prevail, we have to understand that, for the first time ever, the Chinese have more diplomatic posts around the world than the United States do. They're able to sort of surge diplomats into places all around the world in a way that right now we can't. So we've got to think creatively about how to increase people-to-people contacts and how to supplement the work of the State Department. And subnational diplomacy is, a tool that's there for the taking. I mean, I will tell you, governors and mayors, first selectmen, they will sign up to represent America if you give them the chance. And they're not going to do it with the level of expertise or the level of authority that career Foreign Service officers will. But they can supplement your efforts. They can supplement the efforts of embassies abroad. But to do any of this, and this is something that Joaquin mentioned, we need to actually be nimble legislatively. Rosa Brooks has this great book called How Everything Became War and the Military Became Everything, right? And she sort of makes this case about how the Department of Defense became nimble enough and of course big enough so that they sort of tackled every new problem that arose. Part of the reason they're able to do that is that their statute gets reauthorized by Congress every single year. And so they can change their authorities to meet the moment. We don't reauthorize the State Department statute every year. In fact, we haven't done a comprehensive reauthorization in decades. So my hope is that between Joaquin's committee and our committee in the Senate, we will reauthorize the State Department this year, and then we will do it again next year and the year after, so that these changes that you're talking about in your report, whether it be new tools for the State Department, new infrastructure, subnational diplomacy, we get a chance to actually put them in statute, which is a way to make them permanent. So I think that idea is really important about empowering local elected officials. Thank you for including it. It'll help my efforts to build that bipartisan coalition. But all of the things in this report, including that idea, are going to be made much easier if we get back to the practice of actually updating the authorizing statute on an annual basis, as we are supposed to, as we are charged to do as the authorizing committees in the House and the Senate.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the subnational diplomacy is really an untapped tool in the diplomatic toolbox. And what we try to do with the report, in addition to building a more inclusive ecosystem that we're leveraging our greatest national security asset, our people, our diverse people, but also thinking creatively about who we're engaging with. So it's also different geographies in addition to people of different backgrounds. So I want to turn to the pillar leads to dig a bit deeper into some of the remarks that they made. Vic, you talked about some of the myths around what works and what the science around diversity and retention, because the Secretary in his confirmation hearing talked about that he would judge his tenure based on how well he could get this right in building a department that looks like America. And he focused not just on pipeline, but on retention and accountability and data transparency in particular. So can you tell us, in terms of the science, what are some of the things that don't work, that are popular, in sort of the mythology around diversity?
That's right. We don't want to wind up like the chief risk officers at banks, right? We want to do the thing that's smart, not the thing that doesn't help us meet our goals. So first, let's define those goals. DG Perez was very clear in testimony to Representative Castro's committee. The goal is more retention. State Department's evidence-supported targeted recruitment programs through the fellowships that Congress helped to save in 2017 are an evidence-supported way to increase diversity, but that brings the diversity into the lower ranks. What the DG has said she wants to do is to focus on who's moving up and how we can make sure that everyone gets the decoder ring, and so that we can finally select more on merit like Teddy Roosevelt wanted us to, and less on the networks that we inherited from our alumni positions. So first, we've got our goal. We want to retain talent. We want to promote the ones who really know their stuff. Second thing we've got to look at is we have to have an ability to distinguish between what's new in diversity work and what's old. A lot of things are being dressed up in new casks that are really some classic vintage stuff in diversity work. And once we know that some of these things that people are selling as new are actually old, we can talk definitively about what is effective and what is absolutely ineffective, to the point of Mariam's question, right? So look, if you have a different goal, if your goal is to have the current power structure, lots of white men overrepresented in the executive ranks, commit vocally to anti-racism, a mandatory training class will get you there. Some folks will line up and profess, and they'll get their certificate of anti-racism. But our goal is different. It's the actual results, the retention of talent, and the exodus of women of color should be concerning to all of us, right? And if you're pursuing the goal of retention, and you're doing it with the method of mandatory diversity training, then you can expect, let's just look at women by the race ethnicity intersection, 5 years later, 9.2% fewer on average Black women. This is just the average effects across multiple organizations. You can expect to see 4.5% fewer Asian men represented in executive ranks, and you can expect to see 5.4% fewer Asian women represented in managerial and executive ranks. So again, we've got to match. The whole purpose of social science is to ask, what are your goals? What are your means, and what are the actual results, the actual numbers at the end? And if you need some more resources on that and why, no matter how well-intentioned, we can't do mandatory diversity training, including some well-intentioned but misguided proposals to just target it at the recruitment effort. That moves the backlash effect and puts it at the very entrance gate of the State Department. We can't do that. We got to remember that we've got to test some of our proposed interventions in a laboratory rather than, rather have your mistakes in the range rather than playing with roulette with live ammunition with people's careers.
Thank you. We have a question from Nicole Goyette. I don't know how to pronounce your name. I apologize. From CNN. And this is for Wes. Why is diversity a national security imperative? And how does this help U.S. security objectives?
Thanks. That is a great question. We could talk about this for hours, but the shortest way to it is, I really see this in two prongs. One prong is groupthink, that a department full of white men from the upper middle class and upper class who went to the same 6 or 7 expensive schools in the Northeast come in with one perspective about the world and one perspective about problems. And that leads to the same kind of answers coming out on the other side, including to intractable problems, some of which are foreign policy issues that we have been grappling with unsuccessfully for decades. Bringing in individuals who have very different life experiences is essential to break that groupthink mold. And that diversity, by the way, isn't just about race and gender. It's about geography, it's about class, it's about disability, and many other categories. The second piece of the puzzle as well is more specific to the State Department. We are the face of the United States of America to the world. We go out and represent our country all across the planet. If we were the Foreign Service of Iceland, you would expect to have a whole lot of white dudes and white gals sitting in your embassy, because that's who lives in your country. The United States is one of the most diverse populations on the planet. We're a nation of immigrants. We have people from every corner of the planet living in this country, and yet our face to the world looks as if we're primarily derived of Western European Protestants. And that is not all of whom we are. And to be a credible voice for our country, we need to look like our country. And I've seen this play out in a lot of different ways. And I want to use an example of somebody who's in the task force, Sophia Korach, who is in a wheelchair and represents the United States at the UN. There are a lot of spaces where she has been the first person from any country as a diplomat to sit at the table. And the response that her bosses got when they asked to make sure that there was accommodation for her in meetings was, oh, well, we have accommodations for the UN meetings on disabilities. Like the only time that somebody with a disability is going to speak in the UN is in a meeting about people with disabilities, which is farcical. And I think just her very presence in the room is starting to change that conversation at the United Nations, which means it's changing the conversation in the foreign ministry of every single country in the world. And so that's just one tiny example of why this diversity matters as we face outward as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Wes. And I'm really grateful you highlighted Sophia's story. It's featured in the report as one of the 12 testimonials. And I learned a lot. I mean, she had applied to the Foreign Service and the Peace Corps and was sort of, because of worldwide availability, was denied the ability to serve, and was tenacious and found a way to join the civil service. And she keeps fighting, and she's just incredible. And so I think one thing that our report really hits on well is accessibility. It's about inclusion and making the department accessible to everyone. And I agree. It's we need the diverse thought, because the challenges of the 21st century are complex with the pandemic, and they're only going to climate change and everything. So we need all hands, or as many diverse types of thinkers at the table. Kimberly, I want to turn to you. You were on NPR this morning and told an anecdote that when you left the Foreign Service to move back to Oregon, people thought you worked for the Forestry Service. And a lot of us on the task force empathize because people don't know, our branding is a little bit hard sometimes when we're trying to communicate with folks. Even my own parents are like, what do you do? What is this? So what can we do to better brand the State Department so Americans across the country understand what we do, and we also can understand their needs better?
Thanks, Miriam. Yeah, that's unfortunately, that was a kind of running joke for me, the whole Forestry Service thing. Also, that when I'd say the Department of State, I would get which state on a pretty regular basis. So the first thing I would say, and we say this in the report, is that we could rename the Foreign Service to just be the U.S. Diplomatic Service. And that might make it a little easier for people to understand who we are and what we're about and what we do. But just renaming it aside, I do think that some of the things that we mentioned earlier about expanding existing programs is going to be key to making this basically a two-way discussion. So if we expand the Pearson program, which currently, I'll take it back a second. So the original legislation for Pearson did say that these Pearson grantees were supposed to be in places all over the United States, but eventually it just became something that was State Department personnel serving for a year in offices on the Hill. I think we need to get back to the roots here. It's great to have people on the Hill, but we need people all across the United States serving in governor's offices and mayor's offices so that they're not only bringing information about what's going on at the federal level and what's going on internationally to the different places across the United States, but they're able to take this information that they learn about how it actually works out in parts of the country that are more rural or in large cities, and they bring that information back with them to Washington. So when they are working overseas, they have contacts, they know what's going on the ground, and that will help us kind of keep this conversation going two ways. The other thing that we talked about expanding was the diplomat in residence program, which is currently only 13 diplomats and residents across the entire United States and territories. And as you can imagine, if you are one person who is supposed to cover 5 different states, you're probably not getting to numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5 very often. So if we can get ourselves in a place where we think that this is important and we resource it correctly, I think we will better understand Americans' needs and Americans will better understand what we're doing.
Thank you. And I think we have time for probably about one more question, maybe another. This is from Alton King, and I'm going to ask Ambassador Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley, how do we move the conversation from sort of D&I, diversity and inclusion, to justice? And focusing on dismantling systemic racism. Even President Biden, Alton says, has stated racial justice is sort of this whole of government effort.
Wow.
There's some there's some good, really meaty questions.
You know what? You got to start first steps.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing now. We're having the tough conversations. I was on a Zoom earlier today, difficult conversations. I tell people we got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's speaking truth. That's acknowledging what's in the room, who's not in the room, and working to change it. And I think people are ready to do that now from all quarters, and that's how you get to justice. It starts with truth.
Thank you. And I think for the last question, Wes, I wanted to ask you, we describe your pillar one is it's kind of the foundation. It's laying the seeds for transformation and renewal. We purposely framed the report. It wasn't looking at only the last 4 years. It was looking at decades of inequities. And so we also look at kind of these caste-like cleavages, where power manifests, where there's, we talked about the civil service and the foreign service, career versus political, policy over management and administrative. There are all of these kind of power imbalances that really can sort of block us from from everyone thriving and our foreign policy thriving. So what will it take to sort of heal some of these cultural cleavages?
Wow.
Now I'm throwing the hard ball at you guys, just letting you know. That's our last question, but we can end on this one.
Well, as an 18-year civil servant, and we're the junior partner within the State Department in a lot of ways, and I've also spent a significant amount of my career in the Bureau of Consular Affairs, which is not considered one of the sexier parts of the State Department to work in. I've watched some of these cleavages firsthand and witnessed them. I think that there isn't a single silver bullet. There have been proposals to sort of abolish the civil and foreign service and create a single diplomatic service that entails both. I don't know quite how we make that work when some people want to be based in Washington for their whole career and are very happy to travel, but aren't going to spend a significant portion of their career living overseas. Because of that, I think having the two services still is really important. What needs to change is some cross-pollination. One part of that is it's pretty easy as a junior civil servant to go out and do a tour overseas. Once you get higher up into the civil service, it becomes virtually impossible to do that unless you somehow manage to make that magical list for a Senate confirmed job overseas. And it's very rare for civil servants to do that. The second thing is domestically, almost every job is owned by one service or the other. And that's unhealthy. One, it means that senior level civil servants get into a job and sit there for 20 or 30 years sometimes, and they stop being creative about what they do because they aren't moving around and being exposed to new people and responding to new situations. But similarly, there are a lot of jobs that they might be good for that are locked for the Foreign Service and vice versa. And so having churn at those higher levels and opening many of those, especially mid and upper level management jobs, to both sides of the service are very important. But that's just scratching at the surface of some of the things that we need to do. A lot of it is also culture. And I've worked for some incredible Foreign Service officers who model a culture that we're all part of one team working on one mission. And I've worked for other ones where you'll get pulled aside and go, hey, you're really good. Why aren't you in the Foreign Service?
Mhm.
And that's an insulting thing to say to somebody, right? Because the person has chosen the career path that they have chosen, right? And we need to create an environment where we respect each other and lift each other up, regardless of which of those career paths we take. And I think the report has some good ideas that will help start making progress in those spaces. But a lot of this is deeply entrenched culture that is decades, if not a century or more in the making within our system. And so it's going to take a lot of time to be able to accomplish it fully. But I'm confident with the right leadership and with the implementation of new ideas, we can start to break some of those barriers down.
Thank you, Wes. I think we're gonna, before I hand it over to Jenna to just close us out, because I'm mindful of the time, I wanted to thank everyone, the pillar leads, the members, we had over 60 reviewers. It was definitely a collective effort, the co-chairs, staffers, it was incredible. So, and I agree, this is just scratching the surface. This was a theme throughout, that this is just the beginning of a conversation. We'll be continuing it over many months. Truman and its decentralized network will carry the torch. We might go deeper into some of the pillars and maybe even spin off other task forces. So really, this is just the beginning. So with that, I want to hand this over in the final minute to Jenna and thank all of you.
Thanks so much, Miriam. I hope, folks, you can see why we're so excited about the work that we've put out here tonight. We think this is real stuff, and it's backed by evidence and decades of experience. We joked that in order to be a drafter, to have a pen on this report, you had to have eaten in the State Department cafeteria in the last 5 years. And what that means is that folks really know what works in the department. And so we think we are offering a path for implementation that is bold, but really achievable. We wouldn't have been able to do any of that without the terrific work of our co-chairs and our drafters, and also from the generous support of our sponsor, Guidehouse, who also beautifully designed the report. Thank you. And also the work of our senior advisor. We received a lot of counsel from Shell Berg. Shell, thank you, out there in Minnesota. And to the Carnegie Corporation of New York and the Democracy Fund. Folks, this is what we're all about here at Truman. We're about finding really incredible, smart, dynamic people, connecting them to each other and putting their ideas into the world. If you like what you saw here tonight, we hope you'll consider contributing at trumancenter.org and applying to be a member, because applications are open for our 2021 class, and you can find details for that at trumanproject.org. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us here tonight. Read the report, share it out, and let us know what you think. We're going to keep this train moving. Thanks so much. Have a good night.